Women and children are the most affected in human trafficking and smuggling. Indeed, human trafficking and smuggling is the third most profitable illegal economic business, which generates an estimated $32 billion annually, with 137 countries being destinations. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, has identified 161 countries which are affected by human trafficking and smuggling, with 127 countries being origins, 98 being transit points, and 137 being destinations. And indeed, Ghana has recently gained notoriety as a source, a transit, and a destination point for the trade. The country has meanwhile gazetted the amendment to the Immigration Act of 2000, that is the Act 573, to criminalize migrant smuggling, which also serves as a predicate to money laundering. Tonight, we'll ask the tough questions on the extent of the use of fake passports, the nature of Ghana's borders, and tracing people who pass through our borders. We'll also ask ourselves what the law says, specifically when it comes to dealing with migrant smuggling. How pervasive is this, and can it be rooted out? Stay with us and send us your contribution on facebook.com/multitv Ghana and by text 1760. Thank you for joining us on PM Express. Tonight in the studio with me is Assistant Controller of Immigration Francis Palmdetti, and then the Assistant Director of Immigration, Dr. Prosper Price Delali Asima. Welcome, gentlemen, to PM Express.
Thank you very much.
Now, it looks very bleak. I'll read from the U.S. State Department's Human Trafficking Report for 2012, and then we'll start from there. It says that Ghana is a country of origin, transit, and destination for men and children subjected to forced labor and sex trafficking. The trafficking of Ghanaian citizens, particularly children, within the country is more prevalent than the transnational trafficking of foreign migrants. Ghanaian boys and girls are subjected to conditions of forced labor within the country in fishing, domestic service, street hawking, begging, pottering, artisanal gold mining, and agriculture. Ghanaian girls, and to a lesser extent boys, are subjected to prostitution within Ghana. Child prostitution and possibly child sex tourism are prevalent in the Volta region and are growing in the oil-producing western regions. Ghanaian women and children are recruited and transported to Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, the Gambia, the United States for forced labor and sex trafficking. Women and girls voluntarily migrating from China, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, and Benin are subjected to commercial sexual exploitation after arriving in Ghana. Citizens from West African countries are subjected to forced labor in Ghana in agriculture or domestic service. This is very bleak. And I'm sorry I have to start on this bleak note, but tell us, Doc, what the difference between trafficking and smuggling is when it comes to humans.
Yeah, basically, there are four issues which have to do with the differences. The first issue is the issue of victimization. In terms of smuggling, migrants are not necessarily victims, as in trafficking. With trafficking, most often than not, the victims are either deceived or fraudulent means are used to get them out of their locations to their destination. And so they are not aware of the consequence of their movement. And so in most of in those cases, then becomes an issue of them being victims. But in terms of smuggling, there is that consent that is normally given by the migrant. He may ask that he should be smuggled to another destination, either out of the country for greener pastures. Of course, that does not negate the fact that sometimes they could also become victims, because sometimes the consequence of smuggling, the situation they find themselves in, makes them become victims Either they are put in containers, they have to sleep in the boots of cars and things like that. And the other issue, the difference between them again is a transnational aspect. In terms of trafficking and smuggling is more of a cross-border crime. Trafficking can also be transnational, but it can also happen in the country. But with smuggling, it's almost always transnational because you have to cross a certain border, either through legal entry or through legal residence. And apart from victimization and the issue of transnationality, there's the issue of also of exploitation, which is also very paramount. In terms of trafficking, victims are exploited. The trafficker can continue to take money from the services of the traffic victim for many years. For instance, the person is sent to prostitution, and what happens then is that in prostitution, the money that the person gains out of that service is taken by the trafficker. And so for many years, he continues to. But with smuggling, as soon as they enter the country of destination, most often the transaction is over. So these are the basic differences.
Now this United States U.S. Department of State Human Trafficking report paints a very bleak picture. I started with that. But from your point of view as immigration officers, what is the picture like in Ghana?
It's true that the report paints a bleak picture. But before the human trafficking law was passed, I think that it would have been even bleaker, if there's a word like that. But with the passage of the human trafficking law, lots of security personnel have been sensitized about the causes, the effects, what to look out for at the various entry points and even within the country. So I'll say for the past 3, 4, 5 years, security personnel have stepped up their vigilance, and most of these trafficked victims have been rescued by the police service. You know, the anti-human trafficking law is actually a law that is enforced by the Ghana Police Service, and the smuggling one has been inserted in the Ghana immigration law. So I'll say that the picture here may look bleak, but I would say it's better than previously. And as education continues and as officers are being trained to build more capacity in how to deal with these things, and the fact that collaboration is also ongoing with other countries and sister agencies, I think that it would improve with time.
Okay, so tell me, ACO Francis Palm Dirty is the head of public affairs for the Immigration Service. Tell me, the Ghana Immigration Service recently had an amendment for the Immigration Act 523 of 2000. Why did we need an amendment? Maybe I should put it that way.
Yes, before the amendment, there are times when you come across an individual with a group of people traveling, or let me just give a classic example. When I was at the airport, there was this day a lawyer was traveling with 2 other persons who were supposed to be his assistant and a clerk, etc. When they got to the airport, just looking at them, we could tell that there was something wrong with those 2 other companions. After interrogating, we realized that they were not what they claimed to be. So it meant that they had falsely represented themselves to the embassies and had procured a visa and were about to leave. We stopped these 2 persons, but at the time, if this law was in place, we would have arrested this lawyer and prosecuted him. But because there wasn't any direct law to deal with him, because his documents were genuine, he was indeed a lawyer, he had a valid passport, etc. So we had to allow him to either go or return with these ones. The 2 that were arrested were dealt with according to the law.
Dr. Zim.
Yeah, to add to that, if you look at our law as it is now, before the amendment, there are certain sections which we could use as a means of prosecuting on smuggling, but they did not go far enough. And for instance, if you look at Section 2, Section 2 talks about appearance before an immigration officer. Section 4 talks about conditions of entry. 13 talks about residence permit. 20 talks about revocation of permits. And then 52 talks about offenses. In most of these provisions, it is the victim or the smuggled migrant who is culpable, because in most cases, he holds the altered document. If it's a question of appearance before an immigration officer, it is that migrant who has not appeared. So in most cases, he is the one we have to deal with. But then smuggling is an organized crime. So there are individuals who are behind the scene, who actually push this agenda. So this amendment is very relevant. Then we can get to the bottom of this.
So if I understand clearly, before this amendment, the issue of human trafficking was not in your jurisdiction. You didn't have the legal authority to take any action on any issue of human trafficking or smuggling.
Immigration, in the human trafficking law, immigration has a role to play, but the principal agency is the Ghana Police Service.
Okay.
But immigration equally plays a role.
Yeah.
With the smuggling, the principal agency is the Ghana Immigration Service, even though the police can also assist in,
right.
in
So,
dealing with
Dr. Sema, walk us through some of the activities of the Ghana Immigration Service over the past few months. You can go back as far back as 2 years. Some of your activities, which is helping to clamp down on human smuggling rings.
Yeah, to start with, the first issue I want to mention is the fact that we now have what we call the Document Fraud Expertise Center. And this center is actually a center of excellence. And it was the first in Africa, and now we now understand South Africa also has a center now. And we have trained experts there who have been internationally certified by, in fact, they had their training in the Netherlands, and they have now been gazetted to be witnesses in court. And they deal with altered, in fact, most forged documents, alterations, photo substitution, page substitution, fraudulent acquisition of visa, and all these aspects. So that is one fundamental issue that we have tried to address. Also, we have what we call the fraud unit in the Kotoka Airport in all the major entry points. And these units are expected to be able to determine fraudulent acquisition and use of documentation. Also, we have recently set up what we call the Anti-Human Smuggling and Trafficking in Persons Unit. We have set up the main unit at the headquarters, and we also have a unit now at the Paga border, and very soon we'll be extending it to other entry points. Apart from that, we have done some training also for some officers. In fact, we have trained 25 officers in anti-human smuggling and trafficking as trainers, and we are expecting that they are going to evolve the training to all our borders. And also, we have trained some in intelligence. We have 25 trainers who are also in intelligence, and actually they have already even trained 216 officers who are going to be investigators in terms of trying to trail some of these organized crimes.
So really, I'll come to you, Mr. Palmdetti. What would you say the impact of the Immigration Services work has been on clamping down on human smuggling and trafficking activities in Ghana up to today?
I would say because we didn't have the law in existence, we cannot scientifically say this has been the impact. But like Dr. rightly said, the laws that we have in place were not punitive enough. So there are situations where embassies would refer people to us because of a fraudulent document that has been presented to them, and those persons have been prosecuted. But with the passage of this law, which is more punitive, if you look at the minimum sentence, it's 5 years, the maximum is 10 years. And then the penalty points that one will have to pay if there's a fine is quite high. Before this law, the maximum penalty or the maximum term of imprisonment was 2 years. So we think that this passage would deter people, and we think that those gangs would be dealt with more drastically.
Right, maybe you should just give us a brief overview of the law as it stands.
Okay, it says that this act is actually an insertion into the offences section of the law, section 52. So this is section 52A, and I'll just read what it says. It says, prohibition of migrant smuggling. A person shall not engage in migrant smuggling. 2, a person who engages in migrant smuggling commits an offence and is liable on conviction to a fine of not less than 625 penalty units and not more than 1,250 penalty units, or to a term of imprisonment of not less than 5 years and not more than 10 years, or to both. 3 says, for the purposes of this section, migrant smuggling means the facilitation of the unlawful entry or departure from the country of a person in order to obtain, directly or indirectly, a financial or other material benefit. 4, for the purpose of this section, facilitation includes A, producing, procuring, providing, or processing a travel or identity document by fraudulent means. B, procuring by unlawful means other documentation in support of the processing of a travel or identity document. And C, enabling a person who is not a national or a permanent resident to remain in the country without complying with the requirements for legally remaining in the country by any of the means mentioned in paragraphs A and B.
Well, this is the text of the law. So from the point of view of the lay person, the average person, what does this mean?
Okay.
Maybe Dr. Simi can take
Basically, we want to look at it in terms of three issues. The first issue is the issue of procurement. And when we talk about procurement, basically what it means is that to create a result as a result of some effort. And in terms of smuggling, what normally happens is that some individual will be able to allow somebody to enter a country illegally. For instance, we know that before you enter any country, you should have a valid travel document, and you should also have a valid visa. So the smuggler will attempt to ensure that the migrant is able to enter a country without the valid visa or the valid passport. So that is where the issue of procurement then comes in. The father has been able to use an effort to enable the person to enter the country without having the necessary requirements. So
that process, just that process is now being criminalized.
It's criminalized, okay. Yes. The father has now enabled somebody to enter another country. And then most often it's also for financial gains, because it is not just allowing somebody to enter. And that is one of the reasons why the migrant per se is not criminalized. Because if, for instance, the person is a refugee seeking asylum, and somebody helps the person to cross a country, they may be illegal. Because the person is seeking asylum, that person is not criminalized. But the migrant who then, the smuggler who gains profit out of that process, so the issue of profit making is also important. So if the person tries to gain money out of sending somebody through a border to another country, then that also is a criminal offense.
If I understand you correctly, it means that before this amendment, the anti-human trafficking law focused on the victim, but now it's shifting away from the victim to the ringleaders or those people who patronize the victims. Is that correct?
Yeah, not fully. We could have prosecuted smugglers, but it will be more difficult than now. It is far easier now because, as the law was saying, producing, possessing, etc., all these things now have been fully criminalized. But in the past, we had to use other provisions in our act or the criminal offences code, which sometimes did not make it very clear. So sometimes if you get a lawyer, he could, make it a bit difficult, but now it's quite clear. So yes, we could have prosecuted smugglers, but now it is going to be easier for us.
Also, to add to what Doc said, there are two legs of the law. One, illegal entry or departure. And the smuggler would have gained directly or indirectly a material benefit or financial benefit. The next leg is enabling somebody to remain or reside in the country illegally without the requisite permit or not being a permanent resident or a citizen. So enabling somebody to remain for financial benefit or material benefit, or allowing somebody to enter illegally or depart illegally for financial benefit are the elements of the crime. So those are the two legs.
I know that many people who may have their doubts, the extent of these trafficking issues in Ghana. I asked earlier what the situation is in Ghana. I'll ask again, is it that bad, or we're just overblowing simple incidents of families transporting their relatives to one side of the country or the other?
I think that it's quite phenomenal, especially if you want to, let's just use the example of the number of Ghanaians who returned after the Arab Springs from Libya. We had 19,000, and these 19,000 are actually those who were documented. It's very likely that some were not documented, and even some remained and did not come back.
There have been, it's projected that there were 25,000
exactly.
Ghanaians who
and these people were people who might not have necessarily wanted to be in Libya. They were on their way elsewhere and didn't get to their final destinations. And apart from that, if you look at the kind of things these smugglers take them through, and people die going through the desert, people try to stow away on ships and die, and so it's quite enormous. It's quite an enormous thing. And if you look at the kind of indicators that we have in terms of the number of persons that we arrest as inadmissibles who, for instance, want to use Ghana as a transit point to Europe or to the Americas, and also the number of people we arrest using fake documents, then you can see that the case, it is quite substantial, and it's necessary that we try to nip it in the bud before it becomes more intense.
It's about Pomodeti.
We've heard of our citizens, our nationals, trying to go to Europe through Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad, Libya, and we've heard stories from individuals who have actually embarked on that journey and the troubles they've been through. Some may think that by this law we are trying to frustrate persons who are seeking greener pastures.
Is that not what it is, really?
That's not what it is. We are trying to protect our citizens. We think that these journeys are sometimes quite hazardous. They are not well informed about the dangers on this journey. And we think that that is why this law is dealing with the mastermind or the organized criminal or the guys behind the scenes, because most of the time they treat such persons as mere commodities. So that's why we term it smuggling. And in smuggling them, some are pushed in trucks with goods, some even die in the process, some are packed into very unsafe vessels, sometimes they even drown. We think that every citizen of this country's life is so important, and whatever we can do as a security service to clamp down on the criminals behind this is what we have to do. There are so many ways of traveling, and I think that the most effective way is to go legitimately. That's why we have the Migration Information Bureau in the service. Their duty is to inform and educate the public on the ways to travel and the legitimate ways to travel.
This is PM Express. My name is Stephen Anti, and I'm having a chat with the Head of Public Affairs at the Immigration Service, Assistant Controller Francis Pomodeti, and the Head of Policy, Planning and Evaluation Unit of the Ghana Immigration Service, Dr. Prosper Asim. I was talking about the Human Smuggling Conference, ongoing Human Smuggling Conference. Tell us what role the Ghana Immigration Service is playing in this conference and what's in it for the service.
Yeah, well, the conference is actually being organized by the Ghana Immigration Service.
Right.
And it's under the thematic program on migration and asylum, countering human smuggling and other irregular migration. It's actually a 3-year program funded by the European Union to counter human smuggling and other irregular migration. And as part of the program, we deemed it necessary to organize a conference to bring together stakeholders. First of all, to sensitize them on the new law, which we're anticipating to be passed this period, and also to gain their support in the implementation of the law. Secondly, we also thought that there was a need for us to have some kind of strategizing in terms of how to implement the law, because these laws are not standalone in terms of the institutions. We need to have collaboration with other institutions. So one other basis for the conference is to strategize in interagency collaboration and also to get best practices. I think we were telling you earlier on that we have, for instance, somebody from the Nigeria Agency on Trafficking in Persons, who is at the conference. We also have an official from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, who is also at the conference, so that we can also gain some best practices. And finally, we think that we also need to create awareness about the issue. And one way of doing that is through the conference. We have invited the media, we have invited all our internal stakeholders like the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the BNI, the Police Department, Police Service, the CID Department, and a host of others. And again, we have invited the civil society organizations like RECFAM, like ARC Foundation. They have also been invited as civil service organizations. And then we have external partners.
But why this broad list of institutions and individuals and organizations? Do you need to have them all on board in the fight against human smuggling?
It's very important that we draw in these collaborators because they all have a role to play. Some may not be playing direct roles, but they need to understand to help us deal with this crime. Take, for instance, we will need the judiciary because those who engage in human smuggling have assets and they have money. And we have to go after those assets. So you need people with financial intelligence or YOCO to come on board. You need the judiciary, the judges to understand the menace. You need the Attorney General's Department to be there to help with prosecution, police, CID, immigration. All these agencies are so relevant. When it comes to rehabilitation and counseling, etc., the NGOs also play a crucial role. That is why we need them on board. When it comes to funding of the project, the embassies, the European Union also help us. So we need all of us to be on board. Some could assist us with experience and knowledge they have acquired in various fields, which could be useful in the implementation of this particular law.
Now, Dr. Asima, tell me how, what is the state of Ghana's borders when it comes to the work that Immigration Service does at these borders?
I think talking about the state of our borders, I think since the establishment of a border patrol unit in 2006, our borders have become more strengthened. We have had a host of recruitments, and now we are about 4,064. And we have created 14 sector commands, which have minor borders all under them. And I think that we have been able to strengthen the organizational structure. So we have sector commanders, we have the border patrol, you have rapid response units who also move around generally to ensure that they patrol the borders on a regular 24-hour basis. Currently, we are having CCTVs installed in all 17 of our border posts. And this is also going to very much help us in terms of patrolling and in terms of surveillance, because now we don't need that number of people to be at the borders. There will be those who will be in the CCTV room and the monitoring activities in the borders. One other thing that is crucial is that now we are using a PICE system, which is a computerized system. So now we scan all passports that come into the country. And so we have a database, and that also helps in ensuring that our territorial integrity is sustained.
But there are still concerns that Ghana's borders are not exactly as robust as you would expect it to be, and that there are many people who are able to pass through with fake passports, and sometimes some of them just walk through with minimal checks. Is that the case? I mean, are you on top of your game?
Like he rightly said, we have 42 gazetted entry points, and those are the legal routes to use in entering the country. But looking at the green borders of this country, it's difficult to secure it fully. That's why we have sectors. Sectors are basically demarcating the land borders into zones where the border patrol units are meant to patrol to ensure that people don't use the footpaths. I would say that you can't have a tight border. I mean, most of the countries in Africa have similar
you want to say porous borders. I mean, that means anything can go through and come through.
No, not anything can go through.
I mean, smuggling of goods, smuggling in persons.
No, those parts that we don't have the border. In fact, before you set up a border, there has to be an agreement between you and the other country. It must be a busy route to become a border.
Right, so what kind of agreement do we have with our West African neighbors, for example, ECOWAS
All
neighbors?
the 42 borders you're talking about are borders that they acknowledge and also have personnel on the other side to ensure that irregular migrants don't use it. But with the parts there are footpaths that smugglers sometimes use, and we know those footpaths, and we have our men on the ground. But I must add that with the current resources they have, they are doing their best. But if we have more logistics, like vehicles, motorbikes, weapons, etc., we would be more effective, we would deter irregular migrants more.
Yeah, but Dr. Asima just said that you've got some logistics. You've introduced computer systems in checking and scanning passports in order to detect the fake passports and everything. It means that you've been adequately resourced over the years.
I wouldn't say
that we are expecting as a country for you to deliver, really.
I think that so far we have been resourced, but we wouldn't say that it is at the optimal level. And we still need substantial resources. I mean, for instance, the issue of arms we was talking about, one issue that we are battling with, which we hope the Minister of Interior is agreed to assist to solve, is the issue of using arms. We are still trying to get it legalized so that we can use arms. Because though we have a cabinet decision which allows us to use arms, we need a legal basis, which makes us more stronger in that perspective. Yes, we have some resources, but it is not enough. I mean, for instance, what we are talking about now is trying to create joint border posts, so that you are asking about agreements. For instance, at Paga border, there's that intention that the Paga border now will be one border where officers from Burkina Faso, immigration officers from Burkina Faso, and immigration officers from Ghana and customs, etc., will all be at one post, so that it becomes a one-stop shop. That is what we are trying to replicate all over our borders in the sub-region. But again, we will need resources to be able to effectively monitor what we are doing now.
Now, which kind of resources
Yes, he's mentioned some. I mean, for instance, we need camp beds. We are saying that some of the borders we need to be able to, though there are footpaths, we need camp beds, we need ammunition, we need vehicles, we need motorbikes, we need very robust vehicles because some of the terrain is so rough. So these are some of the logistics.
So tell me, which of our borders as a country has been the most problematic for the Ghana Immigration Service? Are you in a position to tell us?
I think I will not. When you say problematic, maybe we have a unique border. For instance, the Aflao border. It's such a unique border in the sense that this is a community that has been split into two. And the border is so close to the capital of Togo. And the structure of the border is such that it's always very busy. There's a market close to the border. And you have those we call border residents who would have to cross the border almost every day for social and economic activities.
Yeah, at the other side.
At the other side.
The other, yeah.
So you have a situation where you have regular migrants who are coming from beyond the 5-kilometer radius demarcated for border residents. If you live within that radius, you are allowed to travel without a passport. And it takes our seasoned officers to profile such people. Now, you're having people walking across the border on one side. You have people who are traveling, who are regular migrants, who need their passports stamped, also crossing. And you have in that same zone, vehicles going through the border. So it's quite chaotic. So even as I speak, I think 2 years ago, there was this agreement with Togo to set up a border post for pedestrians. We call it the pedestrian border, so that we would try to sanitize that Aflao border post. So now pedestrians who are just crossing for economic activities now frequent that pedestrian border. It has been very successful. We have lots of people using it now, just with the intention of easing the pressure at that Aflao border. So we'll say there's a challenge for the institution, and we think that we can still improve on the structures at the border.
So you wouldn't call such a border as problematic?
It's challenging, not problematic.
It's challenging. And yes, you would describe the Elubo border, for example, in the same vein, right?
Elubo is not bad. Elubo is much more calm, and the system is a bit more organized. The distance between the Ghana border and the Ivory Coast border is quite, there's quite a gap in there. But on the Togo Aflao border side, the gap is quite close. I mean, you walk a few meters and you meet the Togolese counterpart on the other side.
Now, I recognize that as the country works towards enforcing its laws and, by bringing our laws to international standards, there is also the task that Immigration Service has in dealing with internal problems of its own. How prepared is the Ghana Immigration Service prepared for this upcoming election in terms of controlling our borders and manning the borders?
I think that traditionally we have been involved in election duties. We have always supported the Ghana Police Service in its activities, both before elections, during elections, and after elections. So we have actually set out the operational directives in terms of how we are going to assist in implementing the process. But manning our borders is a day-to-day duty for us.
And has nothing to do with election coming or not.
Per se, yeah. We need to be ready at any time to make sure that the territorial integrity of this country is actually optimal. So we will continue to perform our services, our duties, and ensure that the borders are safe before, after, and during the elections.
But are you ready for that?
Yeah, we are ready. We are ready. We are ready.
So what should Ghanaians expect from the Immigration Service from this time on through to election? I'm particular about election because there have been concerns of people sneaking in to vote, sneaking in out after voting, and etc. These are only rumors, really, and many of the political parties which make these allegations have been unable to substantiate much. But it's something that we have to be concerned about. How ready are you to deal with some of these problems, and are you in partnership with political parties to assuage them, their fears, for example?
I think when it comes to elections and the issue about people crossing the borders into the country, etc., we are a professional institution, and you need to meet a certain criteria, or you need to fulfill certain conditions to enter the country. We would rigorously enforce that aspect of our law, which says that you need to provide A, B, C, D to cross the border, or you need to provide A, B, C, D to enter the country. That we would enforce. With regards to what foreigners do in the country, the law gives us the mandate to regulate and monitor the activities of foreigners. And that we do. Fortunately, we have an intelligence unit. That unit is supposed to pick intelligence where we think foreigners are conducting activities that are not desirable. We try and deal with it. And we think that every security organization is effective when its citizens help it by providing information. Our citizens live with these foreigners in their communities. They know they are moving out and they are coming in and can tell whether some are misconducting themselves. We believe once we are all partnering to secure this country, we would be more effective once we are having information from the citizenry as to the conduct of foreigners.
Dr. Sima, you have something to say? I was looking at you. And so now let's talk about the different protocols that Ghana has subscribed to. The Palermo Protocol, for example, which is the UN Convention on Human Trafficking. What's the position of the country on implementation of these protocols?
I think basically the Palermo protocols are three: the trafficking in persons, the smuggling of migrants, and the illicit manufacturing of firearms. And basically, Ghana has ratified all of them. It is yet to inform the United Nations. The process is ongoing. It's quite a long process. So I think that very soon we'll be informing the United Nations, and then that will be the full extent of ratification. And our laws have now also been domesticated. I mean, the recent law of the Immigration Service Amendment is part of the process of domestication. The Human Trafficking Act has already been passed in 2005, so that has also been done. And in terms of the illicit manufacturing of firearms, that has also been recently done. So we have actually domesticated all the three protocols from the Palermo. And basically, in terms of human smuggling, the idea is to ensure that we prevent the crime. Apart from preventing the crime, in fact, to do with all the three protocols is to prevent the crime. Apart from preventing the crime, we also need to be able to investigate and prosecute. And then also to ensure that we protect the victims and also the migrants. And finally, to deal in cooperation. Because some of these crimes actually are cross-border crimes. So it's not a country alone. We need inter-country collaboration so that we can stem these crimes.
So how well would you say Ghana, through the Ghana Immigration Service, is doing with implementation of some of these protocols that it has signed?
I mean, with the smuggling protocol, we have just passed the amendment. But I think I did mention that we have already made some interventions. I talked about the Document for Expertise Center, the fact that we have also set up a unit, human smuggling unit. These are all in excess of trying to implement these laws. So we are quite ready in terms of implementation. We have also now, the thematic program that we are running is actually part of the process. And so officers are being trained in investigation and prosecution, because ultimately the aim is to prosecute individuals who participate in this crime. So we are ready for the implementation process.
The Immigration Service is ready to implement all the protocols that the government has appended its signature to. We're back into the studio, Mr. Palmadetti. Tell me about the involvement of the Immigration Service in this action to clean the retail trade markets.
The Immigration Service is a collaborator. The agency responsible for trade in this country is the Ministry of Trade. And one of their laws is the GIPC law. We help in implementing certain aspects of the GIPC law. So when it comes to the issue of giving residence permit, there are aspects of the law, GIPC law, which says that depending on the amount of money you've invested in the country, you are given a quota. A quota meaning that you are allowed to recruit one foreigner, that's if it's one quota or two or three or four. Based on the quota issued by GIPC, we give a residence permit. Now, GIPC has the parent law, that's Ministry of Trade has the parent law. If they think at any point that their laws are being breached, they will need immigration to also be on board. So they have this task force made up of the police, immigration, officials of GIPC and the Ministry of Trade going round. The point is, when you find a foreigner trading or engaging in the retail trade, as immigration, we need to know what permit he's holding, whether the permit he has is what he had intended or what he has told us he'll be doing. So, for instance, he comes and says that he wants to go into maybe manufacturing. On the basis of what he has said, or on the basis of his application, we issue him a resident permit. But in our investigation, it turns out that, oh, he said he was going into manufacturing, but he's now in trading. It means that we have been misinformed. On that basis, we could take action.
But several foreigners are smuggled into the country who end up on our retail markets. Is this something that the Immigration Service is in control of? Are you able to determine which foreigner is being struggled into this country and, and what they end up doing?
We have different categories of foreigners. Immigration will categorize them into two main groups: ECOWAS nationals and other nationals. Now, with ECOWAS nationals, you know that there's always a difficulty. You can't just identify ECOWAS national merely by looking at the person, or
because they have similar looks.
We all look alike. We all look alike. And with other nationals, some it's easy to identify. But I'll say that the Ghana Immigration Service deals with lots of foreigners who are engaging in legitimate business and who are law-abiding. We have a few who try to take advantage of our liberal economy.
But many, you would say, are law-abiding.
Yes, many are law-abiding. Lots of people apply for residence permit, pay their taxes. Before we issue you a residence permit, we check whether you pay your taxes. We also check whether you have properly registered your company. Where you are an employee, we check your CV to be sure you qualify for the position you are applying for. So we have the work permit unit, for instance, seated in the Ghana Immigration Service. All applications for work permit go through us, and we vet those forms. For instance, we need to check your criminal record, we need to check your medical status, among others. So before you come into this country to work, we do due diligence and ensure that those who are issued with work permits qualify to be issued with work permits. At the back of our minds is to protect the jobs of Ghanaians. That's a policy we always bear in mind. So if you come in as an HR person, the question is, why should you be employed if we have lots of HR personnel in this country? Whichever company is putting that application must justify and explain to us why this particular individual who is a foreigner with an HR background is being considered and not somebody who's Ghanaian.
So, Dr. Asima, tell me, does your service have a strategy to addressing the numerous challenges that it faces?
Yeah, our service does have a strategy. I think somewhere last year, September last year, we launched a new strategic plan, which is for 2011-2015. And basically, the objectives of the strategic plan are, first of all, to manage migration in the national interest in terms of social and economic development. And then the second objective is to deter irregular migration. And actually, human smuggling falls under this objective. And then the third objective is to contribute to national security. And basically, what the strategic plan does is to provide us a common articulation of our vision so that all officers are aware of where the service wants to go. And it also ultimately helps us to kind of determine some activities that will help us achieve the three major objectives that I've talked about. And basically, what we realized was that there were some gaps in our capability and capacity. So we chose 5 thematic areas. People, the human resources, we saw were very critical to achieving objectives that we set ourselves. So we have the thematic area on human resources, and we also have policy and process, because we also realize that some policies and processes that we have are not up to international standards. So for instance, we are now redrafting our standard operating procedures to ensure that everything that we do are uniform across the country. We also have information as one of the thematic areas, because again, as we all know, communication technology is very important to every institution now. So apart from the equipment that we need to use, even internal communication is quite critical. And then one other area that we chose was the issue of facilities and equipment, because as we have been saying already, we lack some equipment, and we think that we need to revamp our equipment in terms of arms, in terms of computers, in terms of photocopiers, fax machines, and things like that. So we have a thematic area which is trying to develop capability in that direction.
So where really do you stand in implementation of this strategy you've elaborated?
Yeah, in terms of implementation, we are quite advanced. And what we have done so far, initially we started with sensitization. And we are going around the country trying to sensitize our officers about strategic plan. Because one thing that needs to be done in any change management process is to ensure that you buy in all those who are supposed to be involved in the change. And you have people who want to resist change. So we are sensitizing officers to be aware of the change process and the fact that we want to articulate one common direction as a service. We have started that. We have also started with the standard operating procedures like I've talking about. And in fact, it's far advanced. We have finished the first draft, and very soon we are going to have a technical review of the standard operating procedures. And also, we have gone ahead to source for funding. And the government is willing, we have submitted a proposal for some communication equipment and some vehicles so that we can be able to.
So basically, you're doing well with implementation, but yes. You need more support.
We need more support. That's exactly
to do the work better. Yeah. We have some comments from some of our viewers. Somebody's asking, somebody says, please ask the officers if there is a mechanism for checking the status or validity of passports by holders, either by text or by internet.
I don't know whether I've understood the question well.
Right. The person wants to know whether if the Immigration Service has the mechanism for checking the status or validity of passports by people sending text or emails.
It's difficult when you talk to document fraud experts. They tell you that the best way to examine a document is to feel it, is to hold it, is to interact with the document. So what you'd have, let's take for instance, you send a text message about a passport number. It would be extremely difficult for immigration to check the authenticity of that passport just by looking at the number.
But if you have a reliable database, you should be able to verify if that passport is valid or
until we have an effective network system where the passport office is linked to immigration network, where immigration network is linked to maybe the national identification database, until we have a collective database. Right now, you know that the passports are actually under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, not under Ministry of Interior. So this is a different ministry dealing with the issuance of passports, and we are immigration. We examine the document at the entry point to be sure whether it is valid or not. Until the establishment of the Document Fraud Expertise Center, we had to deal with it at our fraud office. Now we have the center. The embassies bring documents to us to examine. Other individuals who have problems with or are not sure about the authenticity of a passport or a document also come to us. That's how far we can go. When it comes to internet request, you can send it by internet. You've scanned the biodata page. On the face value, we may give you an assessment of the genuineness of it.
Really
It may not
need
be
to have properly touched the document to be able to assess it.
Exactly.
I'll read two more comments from Benjamin Bonti and Driama Atta David. Benjamin says, since we failed to resist the oppressor's rule, such a crass corruption and illegalities will continue to be with us. We must crack the whip by dismissing or punishing criminal-minded officials who perpetuate such crimes against the state. Ghana deserves better. I'm not sure Benjamin was saying anything concrete that you can respond to. But Driama Atta David writes that it's because those at immigration stations take only bribes without inquiries, without making inquiries when people are crossing the borders. They are rather encouraging traffickers. Are your officers encouraging traffickers?
That's not true. On a more serious note, we have very seasoned officers who believe in this country and are patriotic. I mean, just at the conference today, we played a music composed by one of our officers on anti-human trafficking and smuggling. I mean, this is a noble project we should laud. And I want to tell you that majority of our officers are persons who are men of integrity and believe that the mandate for which they have been employed and recruited is properly attended to.
Right, quickly, time is against us. Quickly tell me, how prepared is the Immigration Service to enforce all these protocols and amendments Ghana has signed, including the amended act?
With the amended act, because it's a new law, we would quickly sensitize our officers about the elements of the law so that they can be on the lookout.
Are you prepared for enforcing?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And does your unit have all it takes to enforce?
Enforcement is a collaborative effort. We can arrest the person, but when we send the person to the court and the judge doesn't understand the dynamics of it, we may have a problem. If the prosecution doesn't understand the dynamics of it, we'll have a problem. So we need to sensitize not only our officers, but our key stakeholders who we think will be useful in enforcing this law.
What about equipment and capacity of the
Well,
enforcement
so far as
unit?
capacity is concerned, I think we are doing our best so far. I've talked about the fact that officers have been trained in intelligence, officers have been trained in human smuggling and trafficking. So with the equipment, we still need to beef up some bit of equipment because these smuggling activities take place across the borders. And so, for instance, if we have some more CCTV cameras, that will step up our patrolling activities. If we have more vehicles, that will also be useful. And even communication equipment, because sometimes you are in the bush somewhere and you should be able to communicate with others who are kind of standby. So we will need some support in terms of equipment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prosper Price, Delali Asimi, and ACO1 Francis Palmadetti, Assistant Controller. I keep saying ACO.